Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are opening a file that I think is going to trigger a very, very specific kind of nostalgia for a lot of people. It's a mix of fond memories,
Yeah.
you know, that smell of sun cream, the rush of heat when the cabin doors open, but also a really sharp, almost painful reminder of how quickly these huge business empires can just crumble.
It's true.
We are talking about the rise, the glory days, and the absolute catastrophic implosion of Monarch Airlines.
It is a story that just has everything, doesn't it? It's got, it's got genuine business lessons. It's got incredible technological breakthroughs. And then as we get towards the end, it just descends into this sort of chaos of reality TV and geopolitical nightmares.
It really does.
It really marks the definitive end of an era in British travel, I think.
And we aren't just talking about, a shop closing down on the high street here. We really need to set the scale for everyone listening right from the very start. When Monarch went under in October 2017, this was not a small ripple in the pond.
No, it was a tsunami. At that specific moment in time, it was the largest airline failure in UK history. The numbers are they're difficult to visualize until you really break them down.
Right.
You get 110,000 people. I mean, think about that. 110,000 families, couples, retirees, just stranded abroad instantly.
Just gone.
1 minute, you're sipping a sangria in Menorca, thinking about your flight home tomorrow, and the next minute, that flight literally does not exist. The plane just isn't coming.
And that's just the people who were already out there. That's
Yeah.
the immediate, the crisis on the ground.
Right. But the bigger number, the one that really hurt the economy, and I think public trust, was the 300,000 future bookings.
Wow.
They just vanished into thin air overnight. That's 300,000 holidays canceled, wedding anniversaries ruined, honeymoons that just didn't happen. It was a mass extinction event for holiday clans.
So our mission today, looking at these historical records we've got, the accident reports, the financial timelines, it's to answer one really big question. How? How does a company that was basically the furniture of the holiday industry for 50 years, a company that so successfully democratized travel for the working class, how does it end up succumbing to this perfect storm?
It is the ultimate question, isn't it? Because on the surface, if you just look at the headlines from 2017, it just looks like a string of bad luck, terror attacks, Brexit, fuel prices.
Right.
But when you actually dig into the sources, you see 50 years of very specific decisions that left them vulnerable when that storm finally hit.
Yeah.
We're going to look at planes nicknamed Whispering Giants. We're going to look at a secret government operation to bring people home. And yes, we are absolutely going to talk about the time they tried to save the airline using C-list celebrities serving drinks at 30,000 feet.
I cannot wait to get to the celebrity part. It feels like a fever dream. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We need to rewind. We need to go way back to a world before the internet, before budget airlines, before security lines were 3 hours long. Let's go to June 5th, 1967.
The summer of love. But in the aviation world, it was the summer of opportunity. And this is where we meet two guys, Bill Hodgson and Don Peacock.
The founders.
Yeah.
Who were these guys? Were they just sort of wealthy eccentrics who wanted to fly planes?
Not at all. Not at all. These guys weren't fresh-faced dreamers. They were real aviation veterans. They'd previously been directors at another airline called British Eagle.
Right.
But they looked at the market in '67 and they saw a massive gap. You have to remember, in the mid-'60s, flying was still... Well, it was posh, wasn't it? It was for the jet set.
Right. People dressed up to fly. It was expensive. It was exclusive. You didn't just hop on a plane.
Precisely. Hodgson and Peacock, they had a completely different vision. They wanted to build an airline for the average family. They weren't chasing the businessman in the suit flying to New York. They were chasing the factory worker from Luton who wanted 2 weeks of guaranteed sun in Spain. They saw the potential for mass tourism before it had really, truly exploded.
So they basically wanted to be the bus service to the Costa del Sol.
In the best possible way, yes. But here's the thing about airlines, and it's as true today as it was in 1967. They are incredibly, eye-wateringly expensive to start. You need planes, you need fuel, you need licenses. Two guys with a great vision that doesn't pay for a fleet. They needed muscle, financial muscle.
And this brings us to a name that keeps popping up again and again in the documents, the Montagassa family.
The Swiss powerhouses. This is absolutely crucial to understanding Monarch's DNA right from the very beginning. The Montagassa family owned Cosmos Tours.
Cosmos, yeah, I remember the commercials. So connect the dots for me. Why does a Swiss tour operator need its own British airline?
It's vertical integration. It's a business buzzword now. But back then, it was just incredibly smart strategy. Think about it. Cosmos sells the package, the hotel, the transfer. the holiday rep.
Right.
But they were relying on other airlines to get the customers there. That means they were totally at the mercy of other companies' prices, their schedules, their reliability. If you start your own airline, you control the entire chain.
You control the cost, the schedule, the experience from start to finish. You aren't just renting the bus anymore. You own the bus.
You on the bus.
Yeah.
Exactly. The airline was operated as a subsidiary of a company called Globus Getaway Holdings, which was the Montagaza's main holding company. And this gave Monarch a massive, massive advantage right out of the gate.
Because they didn't have to find customers.
They didn't have to spend a single penny on advertising to find customers. Cosmos just handed them the passengers. It's an incredible safety net for a startup.
That is a nice way to start a business.
Yeah.
So they've got the money, they've got the passengers. When do they actually get a plane in the air?
Yeah. April 5th, 1968. That's when commercial operations launch with a flight from Luton to Madrid.
Luton Airport. I feel like we can't tell this story without acknowledging Luton. It really is the spiritual home of the British charter flight, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And back in 68, it was the Wild West compared to today. But Monarch wasn't flying jets yet. Not in 68. Their first workhorse was a plane called the Bristol 175 Britannia 300.
The Britannia. I'm looking at a picture of this in the notes. It's not a jet, is it? It's got propellers.
It's a turboprop, a big, lovely four-engine beast. They actually bought their first two from Caledonian Airways. And for the passengers, this was, well, it was an experience. It wasn't the smooth, silent whoosh of a modern jet. It was loud, it vibrated, and it definitely took a bit longer to get to Spain. But it was a reliable old thing.
And I'm guessing cheaper to run than the early jets?
Significantly cheaper. And that was the whole point, because they were trying to keep the ticket prices right down for that average family. And it worked. I mean, the growth was just explosive. By 1969, which was only their second year of operation, they hit 250,000 passengers.
That seems incredibly fast for a startup airline in the 60s.
It was rampant. They actually had to go out and buy more Britannias from the administrators of their old employer, British Eagle, which had gone bust by then.
Oh, there's a bit of delicious irony there.
Ooh.
Buying the bones of your old company to build your new one.
It's a recurring theme in aviation, isn't it? It's a cannibalistic industry. But as we move into the 1970s, that whole propeller era is starting to look a bit vintage.
Yeah.
The world is speeding up. People don't want to spend 4 hours vibrating on a turboprop if they can get there in 2 hours on a sleek new jet.
So enter the jet age. This is where the company really starts to look like the Monarch that people of a certain age will remember.
1971. This is a huge milestone. Monarch acquires 3 Boeing 720Bs.
Now, for the non-aviation geeks listening, and I definitely include myself in that, what exactly is a 720B? Is that like a 707?
It's a variant of the 707, yeah, a slightly shorter, lighter version, but it's a proper 4-engine jetliner. Sleek, fast, shiny. And this is where we get one of those great little historical nuggets that you find in the sources.
Go on.
Co-founder Bob Hodgson absolutely loved these planes. He was so proud of them, he gave them a nickname. He called them the Whispering Giants.
Whispering Giants. That sounds like some good old marketing speak to me. Were they actually quiet?
Well, everything's relative, isn't it? Compared to the rattling roar of the piston engines and the deep drone of the turboprops they were replacing, yes, they absolutely whispered.
I suppose so.
They offered a much smoother, faster, higher ride. It was the moment Monarch stopped being a sort of budget alternative and started looking like a proper modern airline. By 1976, they retired the very last Britannia, sold it to a Greek cargo outfit, and went all jet.
So they are flying high, literally. New jets, growing passenger numbers. But the 1970s wasn't exactly a smooth ride for the world economy, was it?
No. And this is where the story gets really, really interesting from a business resilience perspective. We have to talk about the 1973-74 crisis.
The oil crisis.
The energy crisis was absolutely brutal for aviation. The price of oil didn't just go up a bit, it quadrupled. Now imagine you are an airline. Fuel is your single biggest cost. All of a sudden, your entire business model is on fire.
And at the same time, people have less money to spend on holidays because inflation is going completely crazy.
It's the perfect double whammy. Your costs go through the roof and your demand goes through the floor. And casualties were happening. Have you ever heard of Courtline?
The name rings a bell.
Well,
they were big, right?
Yeah.
With the brightly colored plane.
They were huge. They were the biggest rival in the package holiday sector. They owned Clarkson's Tours. They had these bright, multicolored planes, pink, orange, turquoise. They were the absolute market leaders. And in August 1974, they collapsed, went into receivership. It was a national scandal.
So the big dog in the industry dies. What does Monarch do? Do they panic?
Monarch feasts. This is the difference between being over-leveraged and having that conservative Swiss backing we talked about earlier. When Courtline failed, Monarch didn't panic. They swooped in.
Wow.
They hired the pilots and the cabin crew who had lost their jobs overnight, and they acquired the aircraft, specifically the BAC 111-500s, from the liquidators.
That is ruthless, but incredibly effective.
It absolutely solidified their position.
Well,
While the market leader was imploding in a very public way, Monarch was quietly shopping for bargains in the wreckage. It proved that their vertical integration model with the Mantagazas was just incredibly robust. They had a financial safety net that Courtline simply didn't.
so they survived the 70s. In fact, they come out of it stronger. Now we hit the 1980s. Big hair, shoulder pads, and apparently some big risks for Monarch.
The 80s were the decade where Monarch stopped just playing it safe and reacting. They started to innovate. In 1980, they modernized with brand new Boeing 737-200s. But there's a detail in the records here that I just love, and it's a bit of a geopolitical oddity.
Ugh.
They weren't just flying out of Luton anymore. They opened a base in Berlin.
Berlin. Hang on, this is the 1980s. The wall is still very much up. We are talking West Berlin.
West Berlin. Tegel Airport. They secured a contract with a German tour operator called Flug Union Berlin. Now, you have to think about the geography here. West Berlin was this island of democracy completely surrounded by communist East Germany.
Right, deep inside the Soviet sector.
And because of the post-war treaties, only airlines from the Allied powers, the UK, the USA, and France were allowed to fly into West Berlin. Lufthansa, the German national carrier, was actually banned from flying to Berlin.
Oh, that is fascinating. So because it was technically still occupied territory, German airlines were locked out of their own capital city.
Precisely. So British, American, and French airlines had a total monopoly on the Berlin market, and Monarch tapped right into that. They were flying German tourists from West Berlin down to the Mediterranean. It just shows they were always looking for these clever, opportunistic revenue streams outside of just the UK summer holidaymaker.
Very smart. But you mentioned a big risk in the intro to this section.
Yeah.
It wasn't the Berlin base.
No. The Boeing 757, this is 1981, Monarch became the first charter airline to order the Boeing 757-200.
Why is that considered such a big risk? It's just another plane, isn't it?
Oh, no. It was a brand new type of plane. This is the thing. Usually, charter airlines are the scavengers of the industry. They wait for British Airways or Lufthansa to use a plane for 15 years, then they buy it secondhand. It's much, much cheaper.
Right.
For a relatively small charter airline like Monarch to order brand new 757s directly from the factory in Seattle, that was a massive statement of intent. It was incredibly expensive.
They were betting the farm on efficiency and new technology.
And on capacity. The 757 was a complete game changer for the holiday industry. It was a single-aisle plane, but it was long and powerful. It could carry over 200 people, and it had incredible performance. It became the absolute workhorse of the industry. If you went on holiday in the 90s or 2000s, you almost certainly flew on a 757.
It was a good bet then.
A fantastic bet. It combined the range to reach the Canaries or Greece easily with the economics of a smaller plane. It was perfect.
But the innovation wasn't just about the hardware, was it? The whole business model started to shift in the mid-80s as well.
This is the Crown Service era. In 1985, the Civil Aviation Authority, the CAA, granted Monarch licenses for scheduled services for the first time.
Okay, we need to pause and just unpack that distinction because it's absolutely vital for the rest of the story. Charter versus scheduled. What is the actual difference for the person sitting in seat 14A?
Okay. A charter flight is basically a flight that's bought in bulk as part of a package. You go to a travel agent, you buy a week in Benidorm, and the flight is just the bus that takes you there. You don't really pick the airline. The tour operator, like Cosmos, does.
And the plane goes where the tour operator tells it to.
Exactly. And if the tour operator doesn't sell enough holidays for that week, the flight might be canceled or combined with another one. It's reactive.
Right.
A scheduled flight is like British Airways or Pan Am back then. You go to the airline's website or ticket desk, and you buy a ticket from Luton to Malaga at a set time on a set day. The plane flies that route regardless of whether you have a hotel booked or not. It runs on a schedule. It's a commitment.
So by launching scheduled services, Monarch was stepping into the big leagues. They were basically saying, we aren't just a holiday bus anymore. We are a real airline.
That's it exactly. They launched Monarch Crown Service. They flew to Malaga, Menorca, Tenerife. They were trying to build a standalone brand. They wanted people to choose to fly with Monarch, not just choose to go on holiday with Cosmos. It was a huge step towards diversifying their business.
And this confidence, this new technology, it led to some pretty serious aviation milestones. I'm seeing something here about ETA-PS.
ETA-PS, yes.
Hmm?
This is one of my favorite nerdy aviation topics. It stands for Extended Range Twin Engine Operational Performance Standards.
Getchy, rolls right off the tongue.
It's a mouthful, but the concept is revolutionary. For decades, if you wanted to fly across a huge body of water like the Atlantic, you needed more than 2 engines. You needed 3 or 4. Think of the 747 or the DC-10.
Because if one engine fails, you have backups. You're not going to fall out of the sky.
Right. The logic was if you only have 2 engines and one fails over the middle of the ocean, you are in very big trouble. The regulations said a twin-engine plane had to stay within 60 minutes of a suitable airport at all times.
Which makes crossing the Atlantic impossible.
Exactly, because the ocean is much wider than that. You'd have to hug the coast of Greenland and Iceland, which takes forever and burns far too much fuel. It wasn't viable.
So you just couldn't take a direct path.
No. But engines got more and more reliable. In the 80s, Boeing and the regulators started testing the idea that these new jets, like the 757, were so reliable that you could trust them to fly further from an airport on just one engine if necessary. And in 1988, Monarch operated the first ETA-PS transatlantic operation by a British twin jet.
They flew a 757 all the way across the pond.
They flew from Luton to Orlando with a refueling stop in Gander, Canada.
Luton to Orlando on a single-aisle plane. That sounds intimate. A long day at the office?
It was a long day for sure, 6 or 7 hours in a narrow tube. But for the airline, it was revolutionary. It meant they could fly families directly to Disney World efficiently without needing to fill a massive 400-seat jumbo jet. It opened up the long-haul leisure market to the middle class in a way that hadn't been possible before.
And the numbers reflected this success.
Hugely. By 1988, thanks to all these moves, they were carrying over 2 million passengers a year.
So they're flying high. They've got the scheduled flights, the shiny new planes, the transatlantic routes. They are absolutely the kings of the castle. But then the 1990s arrive. And with the 90s comes a new color that would haunt them for the rest of their existence. Orange.
Enter EasyJet. And of course, Ryanair. The 1990s completely changed the fundamental physics of aviation in Europe.
This was the disruption of the century for that industry, wasn't it?
It really was. You had Stelios with EasyJet, Michael O'Leary with Ryanair. They came in with a completely radically different model. No frills, no free meals, no assigned seats initially, just rock bottom, unbelievably low prices.
And they were selling seat only. That was the key, right?
That's the absolute key. People started realizing, wait a minute, the internet exists now. I don't need to go to a travel agent on the high street and buy a package. I can book a $29 room flight to Nice on this new orange airline, and I can go on another website and book my own hotel.
And Monarch was sitting there with its crown service and its free hot meals looking, well, suddenly looking quite old-fashioned and expensive.
They were caught completely in the middle. They were too expensive to be a low-cost airline, but they weren't premium enough to be British Airways. They were the classic squeezed middle.
Did they try to compete in other areas?
They did. They introduced wide-body aircraft like the Airbus A300 and later the A330s for their long-haul routes, which was smart. The budget guys couldn't reach Florida or the Caribbean yet. But on the short haul, the bread and butter runs to Spain and Portugal. They were under siege.
So how did they react to this existential threat? Did they just ignore it and hope it would go away?
For a while, maybe, but they couldn't ignore it forever. Eventually, they had to pivot. And in 2004, they made a really drastic decision. They abandoned the charter-only model almost entirely and adopted what they called a modified low-cost model.
Modified is one of those words that makes me nervous in a business plan. It sounds like a compromise.
It was a huge compromise. They were trying to have their cake and eat it, too. They started charging for food and drink, just like the budget carriers. But they tried to keep some of the old frills to try and differentiate themselves.
Like what?
Well, back in the late 90s, they had a service called Monarch Plus. For an extra fee, you could get pre-booked seats, and I'm not making this up, duck breast, in-flight meals.
Duck breast. On a flight to Mallorca.
For a 30-pound supplement, yes. They were trying to be low-cost luxury, but the problem is if I'm looking for a cheap flight, the last thing I want is a 30-pound duck breast. I want a 10-pound saving on the ticket price.
True.
By 2004, they were chasing that low-fare market aggressively, but they had all the legacy costs of a traditional airline, older staff on better contracts, a proper pension scheme, a more complex, older fleet. EasyJet didn't have any of that baggage.
And this era, the mid-2000s, this is where things start to get weird. It feels like they were having a complete identity crisis. They seemed to be throwing absolutely everything at the wall just to see what would stick. Culturally, they were trying very, very hard to be cool.
Oh, the pop culture phase. This is fascinating to look back on. In 2007, they did a partnership with the club brand Head Candy.
No way, the CD compilation people. The ones with this sort of Art Deco cartoon girls on the
They're
cover.
very same. They painted entire planes with special Fly Candy livery. They had massive billboard titles like Ooh Me and Ibiza on the side of the fuselage. They were running party flights to Ibiza,
What did that even entail?
selling Head Candy CDs on board, blasting house music during boarding. It was a whole vibe.
I mean, I guess you have to know your audience, right? If you're a group of 20-somethings going to Ibiza, that's probably quite cool. But if you're a family of four going to Menorca for a quiet week, do you really want a nightclub vibe at 30,000 feet?
Probably not. It certainly grabbed headlines, though. But then, in 2008, we reached peak absurdity. We absolutely have to talk about Celebrate.
Oh, God. Please tell me this is exactly what I think it is.
It was an ITV2 reality show. Monarch allowed a production company to take over an entire Airbus A321, and they had a roster of celebrities working as cabin crew.
And when we say celebrities,
We are using the term in its loosest possible sense. We're talking about Lisa Mafia from Solid Crew, Chico from X Factor.
it's Chico time.
Exactly. Imagine you've paid good money for your holiday, you're tired, you just want a gin and tonic and to be left alone, and suddenly Chico is doing the safety demonstration and struggling to push the drinks trolley down the aisle on an actual fare-paying flight.
That is just incredible. It feels
Yeah.
desperate. It shows a company that knows it can't beat Ryanair on price, so they're trying to beat them on celebrity vibes.
Vibes and visibility, they were just desperate for differentiation. But to give them some credit, they were also quite tech-forward in some ways. In 2007, they became the first European airline to accept PayPal for bookings. That was actually quite progressive for the time. They were trying to reach a younger online audience.
But despite the duck breast, the house music, and Chico, the financials were starting to tell a very different and much darker story. The fun and games were just masking a rot that was setting in.
Right. We move into the 2010s, and the storm clouds are properly gathering now. 2009 is the real turning point.
The world financial crisis has just happened, of course.
And Monarch felt it badly. After years of pretty consistent profit, they posted a massive $32.3 million loss in 2009. That is a huge, huge hole in the balance sheet for an airline of that size.
Ouch. How did they plug that hole?
The Mentagaza family stepped in again. They injected $45 million of their own money to save it. It was a lifeline. But you can imagine the conversations at the family dinner table in Switzerland were probably getting quite tense.
I bet. And did they change strategy after that? Or just burn through the money doing the same thing?
They tried to change. They formally rebranded to become a scheduled leisure airline. They announced they wanted 80% of their business to be scheduled flights, moving even further away from those charter routes. They came up with a new slogan, "Fly your way every day."
It sounds a bit generic, to be honest.
It was. They tried to compete with the hated hidden fees of the budget airlines. They introduced a flat £10 fee for using a credit card, whereas others were charging percentages which could be more. They were really trying to position themselves as the nice, low-cost airline.
But as we know, nice doesn't always pay the bills in that industry.
No, because in 2011, just 2 years after that first bailout, they lost another £45 million.
So the entire cash injection from the family is gone,
Yep.
just evaporated.
Exactly. And the causes this time were largely external, which is part of the tragedy of the story. High jet fuel prices were crushing everyone, but also political turmoil in the Middle East, the Arab Spring.
Why was the Arab Spring so specifically damaging for Monarch?
Because Monarch had expanded heavily into destinations like Egypt, particularly Sharm el-Sheikh and Tunisia and Turkey, these were high-margin destinations for them. Well, they were a bit further away, so the tickets were more expensive, but the hotels and ground costs were very cheap. It was a great value proposition for Brits looking for winter sun. But when the Arab Spring hit and you had riots and political instability plastered all over the news, tourists just stopped going.
Right, you don't take your kids on holiday to a potential conflict zone.
Precisely. So their most profitable routes basically dried up overnight. They needed another rescue package. This time it was $75 million. But the writing was really on the wall for the original owners.
The Mentagaza family had finally had enough. After all that time.
It seems so. They had supported the airline for nearly 50 years. But they weren't willing to keep pouring good money after bad into what was becoming a black hole. In 2014, the airline was sold, and the terms of that sale tell you everything you need to know about the desperate state the company was in.
How much did it sell for?
It was sold to a private investment firm called Grable Capital, and the price was nominal. It was almost certainly £1.
£1. A 50-year-old airline, dozens of jets, thousands of staff, a household name, sold for a coin you find down the back of the sofa.
And the deal happened just hours before its air operator's certificate, its license to fly, was due to expire. It was that close to the edge, even back in 2014.
So Grable Capital takes over. Now, these guys are turnaround specialists, right? They aren't hoteliers with a passion for aviation like the Mentagazas. They are hard-nosed money guys. What was their plan?
Slash and burn, or restructuring if you want the polite corporate term. They looked at the books and said, this long-haul stuff, it's too expensive, too complex. By April 2015, they had ceased all long-haul and charter operations completely.
Wow. So no more flights to Orlando. No more charters for Cosmos.
Gone. The link with their old parent company was finally severed. They stripped it all back to become a pure, lean, short-haul, low-cost carrier. They got rid of the wide-body Airbus planes and focused just on the A320s and 321s, just European holidays.
And what about the staff?
Big redundancies. And the remaining staff were forced to take significant pay cuts and accept worse conditions to save their jobs.
It sounds like a desperate last-ditch attempt to streamline. If we just make ourselves look exactly like EasyJet, maybe, just maybe, we can survive.
That was the bet. But then we hit the period of 2015 to 2017, and this is where that perfect storm analogy really truly holds up. You can have a bad strategy, or you can have bad luck. In its final years, Monarch had both, in spades.
What happened next?
First, a wave of terrorism that directly hit their core markets. We had the tragic beach attack in Tunisia. We had the bombing of the Russian airliner over Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt.
I remember that. The UK government banned all flights to Sharm as a result.
Exactly. That was one of Monarch's biggest and most profitable winter sun earners. Gone. Wiped off the map. Then you had the attempted military coup in Turkey, another massive market for them, completely destabilized.
So all the places where they actually made good money were suddenly off limits. Everyone just piled into Spain instead.
Yes, but everyone else was flying to Spain too. Ryanair, EasyJet, Jet2. The competition there was absolutely ferocious, so the profit margins were tiny. They were fighting for scraps. And then in June 2016, the knockout blow, Brexit.
The vote to leave the European Union. Now, putting all the politics aside, strictly from a business perspective, how did that hit an airline like Monarch?
Currency. It is all about currency. Airlines are in a uniquely dangerous position. They pay for their two biggest costs, fuel and aircraft leases, in US dollars. That's the global standard. But Monarch earned almost all of its revenue in British pounds from UK holidaymakers.
And the pound absolutely crashed against the dollar after the vote.
It plummeted. It fell off a cliff. So suddenly, every single gallon of fuel they bought and every monthly lease payment on their planes became significantly more expensive overnight. But their revenue stayed exactly the same because they couldn't just ask passengers for more money for tickets they'd already booked.
It just created this massive, unfillable hole in the balance sheet.
A black hole, yeah.
So we get to late 2016. I remember seeing tweets about it at the time. There were rumors flying around.
September 2016. Rumors of an imminent bankruptcy started swirling on social media. The Civil Aviation Authority, the CAA, was so worried they secretly started booking what they called shadow airlines.
Shadow airlines. That sounds like something out of a spy movie. What does that actually mean?
It means the CAA knew that if Monarch collapsed, they'd have over 100,000 people stranded abroad. So they quietly started paying other airlines, United, Air Transat, a whole range of charter carriers, to fly empty planes to European holiday airports and just park them there on standby just in case.
Wow.
They spent millions of pounds just positioning these assets to be ready for a rescue that hadn't even happened yet.
But Monarch survived that scare in 2016.
By the absolute skin of their teeth. They got a $165 million investment at the very last minute. Now, at the time, everyone thought this was Grable putting more money in. But it was later revealed in the insolvency reports that the vast majority of that money actually came from Boeing.
Boeing, the aircraft manufacturer. Why on earth would Boeing bail out a struggling UK holiday airline?
Because Monarch had a massive order on the books for 30 brand new Boeing 737MX aircraft.
Huh.
Boeing wanted to keep their customer alive long enough to take delivery of those planes and pay for them. It was basically a vendor financing deal designed to keep their own order book intact.
That is a detail I did not know. So Boeing was effectively propping them up just to sell them new planes they probably couldn't afford anyway.
Essentially, yes. It was a lifeline born of self-interest, but it only bought them one more year. We moved to September 2017. The ATOL license is up for renewal again.
And this time, there's no white knight. No Boeing, no Grable, no last-minute savior.
No, the losses were just too big. On September 30th, the CAA granted Monarch a license extension, but only for 24 hours.
That is the death knell, isn't it? A 24-hour license isn't a license to operate. It's a license to tidy your desk and turn out the lights.
It is. And in those final desperate days, Monarch did something quite controversial and actually quite telling. They tripled their fares.
I heard about this. Why would they do that? If you're about to go bust, why would you triple the prices? Were they trying to gouge one last bit of profit?
It was actually the exact opposite. It was a deliberate attempt to price themselves out of the market. They didn't want to take any more bookings because the directors knew legally that they probably couldn't fulfill them.
I see.
If they took money from customers knowing they were about to go bust, that could be considered fraud. So by making the tickets ridiculously transparently expensive, they discouraged anyone from booking without having to technically close the shop. It was a quiet signal to the world. Don't buy this.
And meanwhile, behind the scenes, the CAA is assembling the rescue fleet again.
The Shadow Fleet. And this time it was for real. The scale of it was unprecedented. They lined up 38 aircraft from 15 different operators. We're talking Qatar Airways, Air Transat, Titan Airways.
Qatar Airways.
They had Qatar Airways wide-body jets like A330s parked at British airports just waiting for the signal to go.
That must have been a surreal sight for the plane spotters, seeing a huge premium Qatar Airways jet at a regional UK airport getting ready to pick up tourists coming back from Spain.
It all came to a head on the night of October 1st, going into October 2nd, 2017.
The day it all stops.
Late that night, flights that were due to depart, like one to Ibiza, were canceled right at the boarding gate. Can you just imagine standing there, boarding pass in your hand, you can see the plane on the tarmac, and the screen just goes blank and says canceled.
Utterly devastating.
The final flight to ever operate under a Monarch call sign was ZB 3785, coming in from Tel Aviv to Manchester. It landed at 03.19 British Summer Time. Less than an hour later, at 4 a.m., the administration was formally announced.
Lights out.
Immediate cessation of all operations. 110,000 people abroad, 300,000 future bookings canceled. The 50-year-old brand was dead.
And so began the aftermath, the enormous cleanup operation.
They called it Operation Matterhorn, the repatriation operation. It cost the public purse $60 million.
Who pays for that? Is that the taxpayer?
Not directly, no. It's paid for by the Air Travel Trust Fund, which is funded by that little £2.50 ATOL protection contribution you see on your invoice when you book a package holiday. That fund paid for this massive operation, chartering everything from Boeing 737s all the way up to 747 jumbo jets to ferry people home over 2 weeks.
It was the UK's biggest peacetime repatriation, wasn't it? At least until Thomas Cook happened 2 years later.
Correct. In many ways, Monarch was the dress rehearsal for the Thomas Cook collapse. It taught the CAA and the government how to handle a failure of that magnitude.
Before we wrap up the timeline and look at the legacy, I want to touch on something from the source material, the serious detail, safety incidents. Because while Monarch had a generally good safety record over 50 years, there were a couple of moments that really stand out in the reports, and they explain some fascinating technical things about aviation.
Yes, and these are important for the real aviation geeks listening. The first one was back in 1985, an incident with aircraft GMOND. It was a Boeing 757, one of their new ones, flying from Tenerife to Luton.
What happened?
Over Portugal, passengers heard 2 loud explosions. Smoke started filling the cabin. The aircraft lost a significant amount of its electrical power.
That is the absolute nightmare scenario. Smoke in the cockpit, smoke in the cabin.
They made a successful emergency landing in Porto, and the cause was just bizarre. It was leaking lavatory fluid.
The blue toilet water.
The fluid, yeah, leaking inside the fuselage, not frozen on the outside. It dripped down onto a bundle of electrical wiring. Now, here is the really technical part. The wiring insulation back then was a material called Captain. When this fluid hit it, it caused something called arc tracking.
Which is?
Basically, the electricity jumps between the wires and burns along the insulation like a fuse, creating intense heat and smoke. It was the first known major Captain-related problem on a British jet. It led to major changes in how aircraft wiring is insulated and protected.
And the other incident?
2002, Gibraltar. Aircraft G, MONC. Now, have you ever flown into Gibraltar?
I haven't, but I've seen the videos.
Yeah.
The runway that crosses the main road. You've got the giant rock on one side and the ocean on the other.
It is a notoriously difficult and dangerous airport. The rock causes massive, unpredictable wind shear. The captain on this flight used an incorrect landing technique to try and fight that wind. He applied full nose-down elevator just before touchdown. Basically, he pitched the nose down far too hard, far too fast.
He slammed it onto the runway.
He slammed it down so hard that the fuselage, the actual metal skin of the plane, buckled. It creased. The structural damage was so severe the plane was written off.
But they landed safely.
They landed. No fatalities. But it was a stark reminder of the incredibly thin margins of error in aviation. If he had pushed just a little bit harder, the aircraft could well have broken apart on the runway.
So we look back at Monarch now. It's been a few years. The dust has well and truly settled. What is the final legacy?
It's complex, isn't it? On the one hand, you have the deeply human element. 2,300 employees lost their jobs that morning in 2017. Many of them found out via text message or by seeing it on the news. These were generations of families who had worked for the airline.
And millions, literally millions of people who took their first ever flight, their first foreign holiday, on a Monarch plane with that gold and purple crown on the tail.
Exactly. They were a genuine pioneer. They moved from turboprops to jets, from charters to scheduled flights. They democratized the Spanish holiday for the British public.
But on the other hand,
They simply couldn't pivot fast enough at the end of the day. They were a legacy company trying to play a startup's game. They had high legacy costs, a big pension deficit, and an aging fleet. And they were trying to fight these lean, mean, non-unionized machines like Ryanair and EasyJet.
and when you add that toxic cocktail of terrorism and the Brexit currency crash to that already fragile mix.
It was just insurmountable. The margins in this industry are razor thin. We are talking pennies on the pound profit per passenger. You need pretty much everything to go right all the time. For Monarch, in those final 2 years, literally everything went wrong all at once.
It really makes you think about the fragility of it all, doesn't it? We assume these huge 50-year-old brands are permanent fixtures, but they rely on such a specific set of conditions. People feeling safe enough to travel and their money being worth enough to spend.
Exactly that. Monarch's entire business model relied on confidence. When the fear of terrorism met the falling pound, that confidence shattered, and the business model it was too fragile to survive.
And with Thomas Cook following them into oblivion not long after, does the Monarch story really mark the definitive end of that traditional British holiday company?
That is the big provocative question, isn't it? The old model of we do it all for you, the package deal, it has largely been replaced by do-it-yourself on an app. Monarch was the bridge between those two worlds, and eventually the weight of the new world just became too much, and the bridge collapsed.
A sobering thought for the next time we're all clicking book on a cheap flight. Thank you for walking us through that. It's an incredible piece of British industrial history.
My pleasure. It's a fascinating story.
And thank you for listening to this deep dive into Monarch Airlines. We will catch you on the next one. Safe travels.